Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Melissa Dubé and I'm the Public Engagement Coordinator at Results Canada. Am I sharing my screen? I am not sharing my screen.
Yes.
I am now. Okay, perfect. So let's start this over. Hi. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because I'm getting notifications from my colleague. Is everything okay on everyone's end? Kemi, Lindsay, and Laura, if you can just speak up to make sure that everything's good. Because
Yep, everything's good.
Perfect.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So what is it? What is this? Take 3, I believe. Let's do this. Good thing we started right on time. So hello and welcome. My name is Melissa Dubé, and I'm the Public Engagement Coordinator at Results Canada. My pronouns are she, her, elle. I would like to pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of the land where the Office of Results Canada is in Ottawa. We at Results Canada acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. These peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial. We are grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. I'm glad to see so many of you join this call today. We've got Results volunteers and fellows, as well as brand new folks. As I go through logistics next, I encourage you all to say hello and introduce yourself in the chat box. Tell others where you are located. So a little bit of logistics. Please stay muted unless you're speaking. Throughout the call, feel free to ask questions and share comments in the chat box. There will also be time for questions before we wrap up. While this webinar is in English, you can ask your questions in French and they'll be answered in English. You can change the view setting by clicking on the upper right corner and pick between gallery view and speaker view. This is particularly neat when we are not sharing our screen, so you can see lots of faces, and this will be more so relevant during the Q&A period. As such, please turn on your webcam if you're comfortable in doing so. Please rename yourself by hovering your mouse over your name or your square with your name. Look for 3 little dots and write out your name and your pronouns. We also have closed captioning available that should appear at the bottom of your screen. Also, just so you know, I am the one who is going through the slides as my colleagues will present, and there may be some slight delays at times. I apologize in advance if that happens. The webinar will be 1 hour. It is being recorded, and everyone who has registered will receive a link to the recording in their email inbox within the next few days following the webinar. So it's time to sit back and take the content shared with you today. As we have folks on the line who may not be familiar with Results Canada, allow me to start by giving a brief overview of who we are. As a national nonprofit grassroots advocacy organization, we believe in empowering engaged citizens to use their voices to influence the political will to end extreme poverty in low and middle income countries. We combine the voices of our volunteers with strategic advocacy efforts to leverage resources for programs and improve policies that give people living in poverty the health, education, and opportunity they need to thrive. Whether it's through writing letters to the editor or LTEs, taking it to social media, or engaging with members of parliament or MPs, our passionate volunteers succeed in having an impact in the world. In addition to the US, we also have sister organizations in the UK, Australia, and Japan. We are also part of a global health network that includes partners across the world in countries like India, Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, and France. So we're happy to kick off the year with this webinar, which is part of a year-long webinar series that will help equip you with the skills and knowledge needed to be an active advocate for eradicating poverty worldwide. Today's webinar will be focused on developing your skills in communicating powerfully and advocating effectively when engaging with parliamentarians. We'll hear from 2 of my awesome colleagues, Laura Kelly and Lindsay Sheridan. There will also be time for a question and answer period to wrap it all up. And of course, We will be taking an action all together towards the end, so get your Twitter or other social media account ready. To get us started, let's do a quick poll. So I shall launch this, and you should now be able to see the poll. So please answer the following question, which is, how have you engaged with decision makers before? So you can pick more than one. Writing LTs, letters to the editor, writing to parliamentarians, an email, a letter, a postcard, meeting with parliamentarians. So that could be a phone call, a virtual meeting, an in-person meeting, random encounter at the grocery store, perhaps, then tagging them on social media posts, and you have not engaged with anyone yet. I will give you another 20 seconds to fill that out, and then I will share the results. We've got a few more people missing to fill out the poll. All right, I will close it, and then I'll share the results. Excellent. So let's take a look at this. So the most popular is you have tagged your parliamentarian or member of parliament on social media posts, 47%. Writing LTs, 26%. Writing to parliamentarians, 38%. That's great. Meeting, 23%. That's awesome. And then haven't engaged with anyone. That's also awesome, because you are in the right spot to get started and to get some tips and tricks on how to go about that. Thank you very much. Let me just make sure that I stop sharing the results. Let me close that. And now I definitely can see that we have a diverse group. I'm hoping this session will bring something new for everyone. I am now happy to pass it over to Lindsay, who will start us off with a quick recap on what advocacy is. Over to you, Lindsay, and don't forget to let me know when to press next for your slides. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. I'm so excited for you all to be here. And from the looks of it, we have people from all over Canada, which is so exciting to me. So Melissa, you can go to the next slide. As Melissa said, I'm Lindsay Sheridan. I'm the current parliamentary officer at Results Canada. And so once the slide switches, I just want to give another reminder of what advocacy is, because it's really important to kind of ground your understanding of what we're going to be talking about today through that lens. So when we're talking about advocacy, we're talking about conducting actions to influence decision makers and to bring about specific changes. And so as Results Canada, we are a grassroots network. We rely heavily on our volunteers and ourselves to take action. And so this Margaret Mead quote really kind of highlights that. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And that kind of, in my mind, sums up what advocacy is. It's about taking actions with like-minded people to make change. And so if we go to the next slide, Melissa. And sorry, there's a little bit of a lag on my end, so I can continue to talk. But the next slide is going to be about advocacy outcomes. And so some of the things we're looking for when we're doing our advocacy, what's the end goal? And so this can be issue visibility or media coverage. Sometimes people just don't know about the issue you're talking about, and they need some education, or they need a way to understand what you're talking about. It's also an avenue to find new allies and champions. So whether that's parliamentarians or influencers or decision makers, advocacy can lead to people championing your issue, which can bring about change. Also, that attitudinal and belief change is really crucial, because this is about, sometimes it is about changing the idea. In Canada right now, there is a large perception that we should be spending all of our money domestically because of the pandemic. And although I agree with that in large part, I think we would be remiss to think that we can't contribute to a global response. And so that's where that kind of comes in. Political will, of course, because that's where a lot of the decision makers are gauged in the setting we work in. Increased funding is important, and then changes to laws, regulations, policies, or plans. And so these are some of the things we're kind of looking for when we're starting our advocacy or when we're doing our advocacy. So I just want you to keep this in mind as we go through the slides and kind of this whole series moving forward for the rest of the year. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague Laura to get started on how to communicate effectively.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. I'll be speaking here about communicating powerfully, and we can head right on to the next slide, which will talk about laser talk. It's essentially a very important tool we use at Results. It's a short, compelling speech. It's a way to actually just speak effectively on an issue in the most concise way possible in order to get your message out quite quickly, because the decision makers that we often have to interact with, they are perhaps very busy having 1 or 2 minutes to hear what we have to say. And it's one thing to actually know your issue, but it's another to actually share this knowledge. So to share it effectively, you'll have to remember 4 different parts of Laser Talk, which we use the acronym or anagram, I guess, EPIC for engage, problem, inform, call to action. And I'll dig into these in the next slide, as they each have an important component for any kind of piece you might do. So slide number 1 is to engage. We want you to be able to get your listeners' attention. You want to keep it, of course, concise in 1 sentence, even if it's possible, and to even add a personal observation if you might have some on the certain issue that you're talking about. Another idea is a statistic or a thank you, just to kick it off. Our example below is, while the impacts of COVID-19 have undoubtedly been devastating for Canadians, people in low and middle income countries have been hit harder. So you're just grabbing their attention because this is a very interesting and hard-hitting fact. The next part of the epic will be about the problem, and we'll go on to the next slide for that. And it will be where you're actually trying to connect the issue once you've actually got the attention of the person that you want to share this issue with. So you have to think in terms of maybe what the person would care about. This is an easy in. If there's a personal issue that you know this member of parliament is interested in, and then also you can find useful details for this if you go to our website, and we'll have a link in the chat to a place you can find some more details on any issues that you want. An example of sharing a problem in the epic would be, the pandemic has reduced the income of approximately 60% of households in low-income countries. And the World Bank is estimating that a number of people living in extreme poverty will increase by as many as 150 million people in 2021, which is 3 times the amount of people who left extreme poverty between 2015 and 2017. This will perpetuate and exacerbate existing issues such as access to water and sanitation, immunizations, nutrition, and education, impacting women and children the most. So you really dig into the problem here and overview exactly the key issues that are part of it. Moving to the next slide, I'll talk about inform. So once you have shared the problem and given it an identification, you can actually give a solution to this problem to really push the effort that you want to give to whoever you're speaking with. You might give an example of how it's been cost effective, how your solution has been cost effective, and provide also information that you know even further that will actually support this proposed solution. So you can also find a link to that in the chat. And adding on top of that, another personal story here is extremely impactful. Our example is another long one here. It's the micro entrepreneurial sector is the source of income for 80% of the population in low-income countries. Now more than ever, people living in poverty need assistance to grow in their micro enterprises or to start new ones. Mechanisms like the Partnership for Economic Inclusion and Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy can provide assistance by helping governments develop, implement, and scale economic inclusion programs to sustainably increase the income, assets, and economic resilience of lower income communities and families. So this digs even deeper into the problem, and you can give a bit more detail in this section. The next slide, I'll cover the final part of an epic, which is the call to action. And once you've actually prepared your problem, given your solution, you really want to end it off with a take an action, because what do we want people to do is to act on what they actually are learning. And a tips to actually structure this might be to make it concrete and specific, because if you leave it open to interpretation, then it's harder to get the response that you would like, as well as present this action in the form of a yes or no question, so that then people will actually respond to you, because that's what we want, is the engagement back and forth. So the final example for this is Canada must support people living in poverty and respond to the economic crisis by increasing funding for micro entrepreneurs and demonstrate a sustained commitment to doing so by joining the Partnership for Economic Inclusion. So you're giving the solid basis for someone to make an action after you've given this information. And moving on to my next slide. We actually get to do a bit of an activity using these things, although you might not have fully absorbed them yet. I think that it's a good idea for us to just take a look at one of our volunteers, Michelle Tang. I think that's how you would pronounce it. I'm sorry if I've done it wrong, but she actually had this recent LTE and she's from Markham. So I wanted to share this with you so that we could take a look and actually in the chat give our response to what section this might actually be within the epic. So I'll read this aloud. The World Bank is warning that the number of people living in extreme poverty will increase by as many as 150 million by the end of 2021, which is 3 times the amount of people who left extreme poverty between 2015 and 2017. So if you can add in the chat, everyone will give their guesses as to what this part is. Oh, I'm seeing inform, engage. Problem, okay. Any more guesses? I think it's between engaged and problem. So this one, I think I can stop as long as no one else, yeah, I don't see them rolling in quite as fast now. This one is definitely a problem piece because it's giving the actual facts and figures, as well as just the details of what is currently happening with the issue. There you go. And I think we can move on to the next one. And so this one will be mechanisms like the Partnership for Economic Inclusion and Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy can provide assistance. However, funding for microenterprises is low at less than 1% of Canada's total aid program and needs significantly more investment. What are we going to guess for this one? Problem, inform. Oh, inform is a big one. I think this one's a little more easy. Yeah, perfect. We've got inform. That one was good. That's easier to target. All right, let's go on to the next one then, since that one was pretty clear. The next one is a short and sweet one. The impact, of COVID-19, or no, wait, yeah. The impact COVID-19, is having on people's livelihoods is a crisis in need of urgent attention. Perfect. I think that's a full sweep as well, pretty much. Engage. Yeah, I think that's obvious that it's a very big oomph at the beginning that you would use to communicate. And lastly, I think this one might be a little obvious as well, but we'll go through it just so that we all know. I'll take the next slide. So Canada must support people living in poverty and respond to the economic crisis by increasing funding for micro-entrepreneurs and demonstrate a sustained commitment to doing so by joining the Partnership for Economic Inclusion. Yeah. Call to action. Everybody's on the ball. I'm loving it. All right, so for my final piece, I'll take the next slide. And I'll just read this one in full, just so you can see it all together. And the way that Michelle put it together was really good because it's almost everything just that I went through with you right after one another in a really helpful order. to share about the issue. So the impact COVID-19 is having on people's livelihoods is a crisis in need of urgent attention. The World Bank is warning that the number of people living in extreme poverty will increase by as many as 150 million by the end of 2021, which is 3 times the amount of people who left extreme poverty between 2015 and 2017. Mechanisms like the PEI and the FIAP can provide assistance. However, funding for micro enterprises, I'm slowly losing my reading skills, is low at less than 1% of Canada's total aid program and needs significantly more investment. Canada must support people living in poverty and respond to the economic crisis by increasing funding for micro entrepreneurs and demonstrate a sustained commitment to doing so by joining the Partnership for Economic Inclusion. So that will wrap it up for EPIC for me. I hope that you have a good sense of what you can do to share the next issue of interest for you. And we've got Cami in the chat that's just shared further details of EPIC for you. And we'll actually move on now to Lindsay, and she'll share all about parliamentary engagement.
Thanks, Laura. And I'll just add that the EPIC is so great because you can use it in so many different ways. You can use it for your LTE. You can use it when you're planning what you're going to say in your MP meeting. You can use it when you're talking to your community members. So there's so many different ways you can use it. It's kind of even a short way of writing an op-ed in a way too. So thanks, Laura. So we're going to talk about parliamentary engagement right now. There is a lot to cover, so we're going to dive right in. But Melissa, you can go to the next slide, please. And so, as I said at the beginning, advocacy is conducting actions to influence decision makers. So when we're talking about parliamentary advocacy, we're talking specifically about conducting actions aimed to influence elected officials. And this is important because you're not always advocating in the parliamentary space. It might help, but it's not always the arena that you're going to be advocating in. And so another thing I want to bring to your attention that's really important is that you can advocate for anything at any level of government. So you really need to do your research ahead of time and kind of understand if the municipal, provincial, or federal government is going to be the best avenue to seek change. And so you can do this by doing research, and there's so many great resources that you can check out online. And I also just want to say that advocating can be so simple as to trying to get a recycling program in your community to bigger issues which can be as important, and it really depends, because anything about making the world a better place I think is important, but all the way up to the work we do in global health and international development. So whenever you're advocating for change, you really are kind of using that EPIC format and using all the tools in the toolbox that I'm going to hopefully explain to you today. So we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, there's multiple levels of government you can advocate for. Results Canada specifically advocates within the federal government, and this is for a lot of distinct and important reasons. So number one, the federal government is the only level of government that has the jurisdiction to speak to international matters and has the international mandate. So that's pretty important. Provincial governments can say stuff about the international ways of the world, but it's the federal government that really has the actual jurisdiction. This is also where the budget consultations happen. And actually today, the government just released their 2021 budget information. And so for a lot of volunteers on the call, you'll be hearing from me shortly on how we can activate around that space. And this is really crucial because the budget kind of informs all of Canadian, like the money that the government has. And so this is when we're talking about different allocations and how we can influence that policy and really see what we want the government to be spending money on. So it is a really important avenue. Within that, funding mechanisms, so official development assistance or Canadian aid is the amount of money that Canada gives to international development or global health initiatives. And so at this level of government, this is where we're really able to influence what that money could be used for, what it could be going to. It's also where we can influence policy, so trying to make sure that the government is keeping up with their accountability measures and is very transparent with their spending. And so all of these different things feed in. It's also where multilateral relationships are formed. And so earlier this year, we advocated for Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, to get funding. And so Gavi often communicates with the federal government on what would be a great, I guess, amount of money that would help save the most people or help vaccinate the most people. So that's something that happens. It's also where legislation is formed, so this is really crucial. And it also kind of represents the Canadian voice, because this is the federal level. It's supposed to represent every province and territory. And so we really have interesting debate and conversations on this level based on constituents and what they care about. So we can go to the next slide, Melissa. So right now it's actually really exciting. And if you're kind of a politics junkie like me, this is a really interesting time to be advocating. Not only are we in a minority government, which I'll explain a little bit later, but we're also in a hybrid parliament, which has never happened in the history of parliament, where we have actual members at home, signing in virtually, on calls, in committees, voting. And so this is actually really does change the dynamic in so many ways. We're seeing MPs are a lot more in touch with their constituents because they're home more often, and they care a lot more. And that is partly also because we are also in a minority government. So right now the Liberal Party holds the majority, but they don't have half of the House of Commons. So what that means as a minority government is that they have to get votes, and they have to get other parties to support the legislation they want to pass in the House of Commons if they want it to be successful. And so this is kind of crucial because it means that they have to have different concessions and negotiations within that space. The other thing I want to say when we're talking about politics, and it's really important to kind of always have this when you're advocating, is Results Canada is a nonpartisan organization, which means we try to work with all of the parties in Canada. And this is really important because oftentimes I think people do create preconceptions and different notions based on parties. And we have found champions across the spectrum that support international development, global health, and all of the programs we work on. So it's really important to kind of keep an open mind, especially if you're going into meetings, because it's crucial to have a relationship with the person and kind of take the politics out of it for a second when you're trying to advocate for something you care about. And so I always just hope that you heed that advice and keep that in mind going forward. And I guess we can go to the next slide after that, Melissa. So if you have never engaged before with your member of parliament, or you're trying to figure out how to kind of stay involved, stay interactive in the federal space, one of the first things I always tell people, and Camille's going to post a link here soon, National News Watch is a federal kind of aggregate of news. So it pulls any federal news articles from all the different sites and kind of puts them in one place so you can stay up to date with any news that's happening related to federal politics. There is some provincial politics that come in too, but it's a really great resource. And this is kind of what parliamentarians on the Hill use just to get a quick glance in the morning of what's going on. So it's definitely a good place to start if you're trying to learn more about Canadian politics. When you're specifically trying to learn about your MP, there's a lot of things that I think is really important when you're just starting to do some research and you just have a curiosity about what they're interested in and what they do. And so the first thing I always say is you have to identify who your MP is, and you can do that using your postal code. And then you want to go to their personal website and kind of see, one, what they've listed on their website, if anything pops out at you, if you recognize anything. And then two, there is usually an option to subscribe to a newsletter or some type of quarterly publication or monthly publication that their MP writes to send to you. And this is a good way to understand what they've been doing in the House of Commons, if they have any activities coming up in their calendar that you might be interested in. And it also kind of goes over what they're doing in your community. And so subscribing to a newsletter is actually really important because it just keeps you up to date, and it also helps you find opportunities where you can kind of get involved. And this is more important now more than ever, because everything's held virtually. And so if you want to find out what's going on and participate, you have to be able to know where that information is. Another actual useful tool that a lot of people don't realize is that most communities and most MPs have a Facebook page or a Facebook group. And so if you join this, it's actually a really interesting place to see what other people in your community care about and how your MP responds or how that dynamic happens. So that's another crucial place to be. And then finally, something I always like to show, and I think it's so important when you're starting out, is if you have social media, especially Twitter, follow your MP and kind of keep an eye on what they're up to, like things if you endorse them or you agree with them. And then you also get a sense of whether or not a staff is controlling the account or the actual MP is. And I think that's really important because it's kind of a cool distinction. So in the tweet on the screen, It's NDP MP Heather McPherson, who's also the critic for international development. And so she has put Scottish accents and Labrador retrievers. Seriously, is there anything better? And so a staffer wouldn't put that on the members' wall. This is obviously her tweeting about something that interests her. So it's a really great way to learn their personalities. One of the things that I know was brought up in the questions before this that a lot of people were really curious to learn about is how to address different MPs, all the different terms that are used, because there is the honorable, everybody is called different things. And so I just wanted to take a second while we're here to go over how to kind of understand how you should be addressing the person you're talking to, because there are very subtle nuances and differences that are very important. So within government, you have the Prime Minister, and then he has cabinet members who are the ministers of each department. And so as soon as you are assigned a cabinet position, you become an honorable. So as soon as you join cabinet or are a part of cabinet, your title will be the honorable, and then whatever your name is. So the Honorable Karina Gold, Minister of International Development. And so when you're addressing Karina Gold and you're not a constituent, you want to use her honorable title. If Karina Gold is actually your MP, you're actually fine just addressing her as Member of Parliament. When you're writing more formal letters to maybe people who aren't your MP, that's where the language is really important. And if you're ever unsure of a title or something about your MP, you can check the House of Commons website. Just search your name, your MP's name in Google and type House of Commons. Their like profile essentially will come up and it'll say whether or not they have a title. So the one interesting thing is once you've been a minister, you always carry that honorable title with you. And so previous Conservatives who were cabinet ministers, they might have the honorable title as well. So just something to keep an eye on. And I can answer more questions at the end on that because it can get a little bit tricky. But Melissa, we can go to the next slide. So how you can take action with your Member of Parliament. And there's so many different ways you can do this. And it's really an exciting time because we are virtual. So there's a lot of different creative ways that we are trying to build off of and expand on. But the top 5 that Results Canada volunteers often take action on are the ones listed here. So following your MP on Twitter, that is an action because it's a starting point. It's really important to just keep an eye on what they're up to, what they're doing. Attend a virtual town hall. So this is really a great opportunity to engage with your Member of Parliament and your community, because if you're at a town hall, you can bring up what you care about. You can bring up what you're advocating for. And not only does that start a conversation with your community, it also shows your MP that you're showing up in the space and you're ready to explain and have a conversation. One of the things right now that's really crucial, and if any of you are tuned in with your MPs, I know some of the Ottawa folks have already done this, was some MPs will be, Liberal MPs will be hosting budget consultations with their constituents. And so this is a great opportunity for you to pop in and explain why, let's say, investing in an international global response needs to be represented in the budget, because the only way we'll be able to kind of recover from this pandemic is if we have a global approach. You can also introduce yourself by email, and this can be just something quick saying, hi, my name is this. I'm a constituent in your riding. I care about these issues. I hope in the future that we can schedule a meeting or have a time to talk more about this. And then again, send a meeting request to your MP. I'm going to go over that after because it's one of the most, I would say, effective tactics. It also takes the longest sometimes and can be more burdensome because there's a lot of steps. And then finally, writing an LTE and mentioning your MP. So MPs really do scans of all the news to see if they're involved in it. So chances are, if you include their name in your LTE. Sorry, I muted myself accidentally. One thing to be careful with writing LTEs is if you are trying to build your relationship, you want to make sure if you're disagreeing with them that you're doing it in a respectful way so that they don't automatically think you're combative. And so that's just something always to keep an eye on. So we can actually go to the next slide now, Melissa. So this is important. If you haven't met with your MP before, or if you're thinking of meeting with your MP, this is something that's really crucial. And these are kind of the main top steps when you're doing that. International Development Week is upon us in just 2 weeks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on because it's a little bit separate than how you would go about this. But if you are meeting with your MP for the first time or want to engage with them, these are some steps that should help. So first, you want to find their email. It's going to be on the House of Commons website. You're going to request a meeting by email. You're going to say, hi, my name is, I'm a constituent. I would like to meet with you to discuss so-and-so. So once you've actually booked the meeting, you're on the call with your MP. You always want to introduce yourself as a constituent no matter what. MPs always confirm or usually confirm this. So you always want to include your postal code in communications, or at least when you're introducing yourself in a call, say you're a constituent and you live in this area. You then kind of want to have a relationship building moment. So you want to explain what you're passionate about and why. You can bring in domestic things, you can bring up things in your community, you can bring up any global issues, but this is really a moment for your MP to kind of have a better idea of who you are. And this is really important because that's what MPs remember, is kind of your story and what really made you reach out and do this. And then once that little kind of thing has happened, you want to use the EPIC model. So again, you go through what Laura said by going through all the steps, engaging the problem, informing, and then giving the call to action. You want to use plain language and you don't want to overwhelm them. Oftentimes MPs are super busy. They're meeting with people constantly. They're in the House of Commons. And so sometimes they just don't have an education or know about the issue you're talking about. And so you want to use plain language so that they can have a better understanding while not being caught off guard by not knowing what a word means. So that's really crucial. And then you want to always ask them to take action. This is arguably the most important thing, and it's the crucial part of any engagement, is you want to make sure your MP is taking action for you. After you've had this call, after you've had a conversation, you want them to say, hi, I will support this. I will write a letter for you. I will do this for you. Whatever your action is, you want them to confirm verbally that they're going to do it. And that kind of gives you the ability to hold them accountable when you're following up. So it's kind of a really important thing to include. Then you want to make sure you take a photo. This is great because it reinforces on social media. It shows your MP that you're on social media. It also shows them that you're engaged and going to keep up the conversation. Then you want to follow up after the meeting. Let's say they asked you for information that you had to research after, or a couple days later, you can check in and say, hi, you agreed to do this for me. I was just wanting to know if you have a timeline or can tell me the progress you have on taking the action I asked you. Then stay close to MP staff. Oftentimes they're the gatekeepers, they're scheduling, they have all the information, they're drafting the briefs. And so having a good relationship with MP staff is also very crucial. And then finally, you want to engage with your MP beyond your meeting. And this is where things can get a little bit, I guess, not dicey, but it's really hard sometimes to gauge when is the most appropriate time to check in with your MP. And so partly you have to kind of feel out if there's any opportunities that create a really great engagement moment, then of course you want to get involved. But sometimes if you had a meeting, you sent a couple emails, then you want to take a break for a bit just to give them a breather and to kind of give them space before you come in with another action or ask. And so one of the things Results Canada does is every month we have actions on our website that kind of we've created what we think will be the most strategic in our advocacy. And so that's why sometimes you don't always see an MP action represented every month, is that sometimes it's most strategic to put our efforts towards something else, or it's really busy. Right now, the House of Commons just got back today, and there is a lot of enormous bills coming through the docket shortly. So it might not be the most appropriate time, but International Development Week in 2 weeks is a perfect hook, the perfect opportunity. And so you have to kind of feel it out and have an understanding of when's the most appropriate. So we can go to the next slide, Melissa. So some quick tips, because in politics, things can be controversial. Things you might not always agree. There might be differences. And so these are just some tips if you ever are in a hard meeting or you're in a meeting that you didn't really expect to go the way you planned. Always focus on the people and not the politics. At the end of the day, it's about building a relationship with your elected official so you can work together to take action on the cause that you care about. And so sometimes you have to pull out the politics and just focus on that person. Oftentimes we have MPs who tell us that they disagreed with their party platform. The Conservative Party under Scheer had a 25% cut to aid. in the last election platform, and I heard time and again from other Conservative MPs that they disagreed with that policy. And so you always have to remember that there is differences within parties as well. Also, find common ground. This is really key in building the relationship. If you go to the same grocery store, if you had the same pizza, if you went to the same high school, finding that common ground and then building it off into something else like, oh, you worked in finances. Maybe you will have a better understanding of micro entrepreneurship or micro loans. And so then it's finding the other common ground that you can kind of start a conversation and a dialogue around. Whenever possible, stick to the facts. Facts don't lie. I know there's a lot of misinformation out there, so make sure you're using formal websites that have verifiable stats and statistics. And then always be an advocate, not an opponent. You want to go into meetings with an open mind and an open understanding and not combative, because that will show in your body language and your speech. And then finally, this is just a reminder for everybody, is pick your battles. Sometimes you might come up to somebody, whether it's an MP, a community member, or somebody else, and it might just not be worth your time to engage with them on an issue. So it's also really important to learn and build and understand when it's the right time to say no and walk away from something. So we can go to the next slide. So this is something I'm really excited about. I've actually been working with partners on this, so I'm really excited that you're all here today on the call. But from February 7th to the 13th marks International Development Week. So International Development Week is a Canadian milestone, and it's just a week to kind of show what Canada has done, both Canadian aid and where we need to be in terms of our International Development Week. It's a week to celebrate and also reflect and learn on how we can do better. And so this year, because of the virtual setting, Cooperation Canada, formerly known as the Canadian Council for International Cooperation, is hosting a virtual Hill Day or Lobby Week. And so essentially what this means is that they're inviting the Results Canada network of volunteers to join a bunch of other passionate grassroots Canadians to join forces and talk about the importance of official development assistance, Canadian aid, in the COVID-19 context. And so this is really great because it's a huge opportunity right before the budget to have a lot of meetings with parliamentarians and really explain why it's so crucial now more than ever that we're investing in a global response and we are ensuring that global health systems are protected. And so I think Camille already put a link or is going to put a link in. If you haven't registered, please register using this link. I will note that all of the meetings are being scheduled by Cooperation Canada. And so they will put you in a group and they've already scheduled meetings. So they'll find a meeting and they'll put you with a group, give you all the materials you need and a Zoom. And then you kind of just go off with your group and have a meeting with your parliamentarian. And so you can use that EPIC format even when you're planning who will say what in your group at these. So it's a really exciting opportunity. You can use some of the things I taught you today as tools and resources to help in this meeting, but they will also be giving you a package which will include some Results Canada resources for different ways, like so information about your MP, more information about the sector ask, which is really important, all of the organizations coming together around a common goal, and then just a little bit more broader information about the parties. And so I definitely recommend registering. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and send them my way. But just also please remember that this is being organized by Cooperation Canada, so I'll answer the best I can, but I might not have all the answers. So we can go to the final slide of my presentation before diving into taking action. So things to remember. Parliamentary engagement, they work for you. These are elected officials who your fellow community members elected to be put in this position to work for the needs of your community or your region. And so it's so crucial that you remember this, because sometimes I think politicians or parliamentarians kind of are put on a pedestal and it can be daunting engaging with them, but you always have to remember that they work for you and it's part of their job to hear you out and to listen to your concerns and learn what you're interested about. You don't need to know all the answers. If you're in an MP meeting or having a conversation, just be honest and say you don't know something. It's really important to be able to fill that gap as a volunteer or as someone who is advocating for something they care about, who also does something else, you're not expected to be an expert on every single thing. So just make sure you're aware of that. And if you don't know the answer, just let them know that you can reach out afterwards, after you've done some research, and provide something. It is really all about relationship building, as I've said over and over again. If you have and are able to foster a positive, great relationship with your MP, they're more likely to help you out in the future, and they're more likely to remember you, which will make your advocacy easier and will make them take more action for you, which is the crucial part of moving down the line to influence decision makers who are elected officials. And then finally, any action is a starting point. Sometimes I think it's really hard, especially today, to sift through what we can do to solve all of the issues going on. But just to be mindful and to be easy on ourselves, that any action you take is a starting point that you can build off to take more action. And so it's really crucial that we all give ourselves a pat on the back for what we do each and every day, as we are living in a pandemic right now, and it's not normal times, and there's a lot of crazy things happening. So on that note, Melissa, you can go to the next slide. I hope you all are ready to take action, because we're gonna give a couple of minutes to do an exciting action, something that I'm really excited about. So you can go to the next slide, Melissa. So this is a little bit different. Normally we provide sample tweets, but I wanna hear from you all today. If you don't have Twitter, post on Facebook or Instagram, or just write it down in the chat. But I'm really curious to see what the change you want to see in the world is for 2021. And if you're on Twitter, tag your MP in Results Canada so we can see, or share one fact you learned today and tag Results Canada or the hashtag. And that's just to help us be able to make sure we see your activity and your Twitter, so we can help amplify them on our page too. But I'm really curious to learn what you all care about. It's really hard on a virtual setting. So if you're comfortable posting a tweet, if you want to write it in the chat, but I'd love to learn what change you want to see in the world in 2021. So we'll just give a couple of minutes to think about that. I know it's a big question, and I know maybe sometimes on Twitter it takes some time to finesse the words. But if you want to just put 1 or 2 words in the chat, that would be helpful. And then I'll just say that after we've done that, I hope we can take a group photo before we dive into questions, because I really love the photos when everybody, obviously if you want to turn your video on, but I always love the way the photos look, and it's something that I think is the best way to show community as we're in the pandemic. So I don't know if anybody's posted, or if you're not comfortable posting, that's absolutely fair as well. I know it's putting you on the spot, but I guess I could go first, and then I can volunteer my colleagues to share maybe even what the change they want to see. So this year, I really hope that Canadians can get vaccinated, and I also hope that we can be better at donating doses of the COVID vaccine to low and middle income countries. I think it's something that needs to happen. We have too many, and it's really important to me that all countries, no matter what their level of wealth is, have access to these life-saving innovations. So then I'll pass it to Melissa. I'm going to put her on the spot to see what change she wants to see.
Many changes, of course. Thanks, Lizzie. I think I'll say for me that I don't know if it's a change or it's a hope, or I want to see people being more active in engaging with the member of parliament. So it's very much so fitting, because since I've been with Results, I can see the power that I have as an individual. I had never really engaged with my own member of parliament in the past before joining Results, and since I've been with Results, I have noticed the chance and the power, as we've said, that we have as constituent. And I'm proud to say that in some cases, the member of parliament agreed to take on our action based on our meeting. So certainly, I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot of us just going for it. You don't need to be an expert, just do it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
So I'm starting to see some in the chat, which I'm really excited about. So I've read that people in poverty live on $1.90 per day, which is now dropped to 40 cents per day. Is that correct? I would have to check it to make sure. The 190 figure is kind of a baseline for extreme poverty. And so that's what's usually used economically as a baseline. So I would have to check that, but it could be true. A lot of things are happening. And then another person put, being able to believe the news reports on national and international issues, honest, incredible news reporting, which is a big one and it's super important. So thanks for sharing those. I hope that today and tomorrow you can think and tweet and tag us so we can read more of them. But with that, I think we can open it up for questions and take a picture. So if you have any questions on anything we've talked about, we can absolutely go into that. And I think Melissa's going to say just a couple of things before we dive right into questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Lindsay. So as Lindsay said, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that we can all see each other. But before doing so, I just want to make sure that you take note of our contact details if at any time you want to get in touch, and they will also be shared in the chat box. So let me stop sharing and we can dive into the questions. So I did get a question earlier. I just need to scroll and find it. So the question is regarding the problem statement. So as part of the EPIC presentation that we had earlier, is there a place to reference or quote the source of the statistic? I see a reference was not included in the example given. Considering that sometimes there may be different statistics and the possibility that the audience might have a different informed source. I'll take a first stab at that question, and then I will invite colleagues and other volunteers as well to jump in as well. I would say that depending on where you're using the EPIC, certainly you can use a source. So if, as an example, you're writing an op-ed or an email or a letter to your member of parliament, you have way more room so that you can certainly include links and resources in that sense. If you're looking into doing maybe an LTE or even a tweet where it might be a bit tighter, you could certainly say something like, according to World Bank, something, but you could also try to squeeze in a source, but sometimes it'll really depend on the newspaper where you're submitting your LTE, your letter to the editor. So definitely it's always better to provide your sources, but it may not be always possible. So in a tweet, you could do a thread, you could include an image with the source, the details on there. So it really varies, but if you feel more comfortable adding a source, please go for it. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
I'm just not sure. You might have already mentioned this, but I think if people would tag, if they have the social platform that you're posting on, if the people that have, you know, the source have that social platform as well, then you can just tag them at the end of your message. And I think that's also an effective way. Just like there's a way to get a source in with any kind of method. I think if you just take a step back and think of maybe linking or the quickest way you can say a source. That's my tip.
Awesome. I hope that answers your question, Abiola. Thanks for asking. Moving on to the next question I see in the chat box. Hopefully I haven't missed others. If I did miss your question, please just maybe copy and paste it again, and my apologies. So I'm seeing from Chelsea, how do we manage engaging with our member of parliament when we are working on results campaigns and other initiatives as well, such as advocating for ending global poverty and addressing funding education?
Yeah, so that's where it becomes tricky and strategic. So there's multiple ways that we often struggle with this, even at results, because you do have to be mindful of when you're engaging. But for the example you just used, if we're talking about eradicating poverty and you want to talk about education, there is a thread that you could weave through both. That education does help people provide opportunities. It gives economic inclusion more of a, sorry, I'm mumbling my words. Basically, education leads to more economic opportunities. People who are have higher levels of education and access to education usually are able to flourish and strive afterwards, which helps them leave extreme poverty or get out of the poverty trap. So that's something really important. Another way is to be very mindful of what's coming next. So with Results Canada, that's why the calls to action monthly are really crucial. So the Global Partnership for Education is actually launching their replenishment in a couple of months. So today was the formal International Education Day, which is really crucial. And then we'll see that we're going to pick that thread up again. So it's really about balancing them. If you can thread them together, that's great. If there's one that has more of an opportunity or a moment in time for that specific interaction, that's when you're going to want to use that one over potentially a different one. Sorry, that was a roundabout answer.
Thank you, Lindsay. Next question, and by all means, if your question was answered rather, and you want to dive in a bit more, feel free to add in the chat box or simply raise your hand. I should have mentioned that actually. Next question I see is, when we write our letters, can we copy some of the facts from the result sources? Yes, absolutely. It's notably there for that, to help you learn more about the issues, and we really do our best, like colleagues, with making sure that they provide the best sources, and they are trusted sources, anything that you see on our website. So absolutely, you can use those links and those sources, definitely. Did also have another question received, which is, I am not a Canadian citizen, and I'm here as a student, or I'm a permanent resident. Can I speak with my member of parliament? Are they going to care because I'm not a citizen?
Yeah, so I also answered that question in the chat privately, but I would say some MPs really want to hear international students or people who might not necessarily be permanent citizens' perspectives. They might be really interested in learning what you have to say. Some MPs might only care about their constituent issues or permanent resident issues. And that's just the reality of how they're governing the community, to be honest. And so what I said is, it's always worth asking. There's no harm in reaching out. Maybe you can have a really great dialogue and conversation about your experience and your situation, or maybe they'll just say, unfortunately, right now, I'm only fielding questions and engagements with my constituents. So either way, it's worth reaching out to see how they respond.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any question, either in the chat box or if you want to unmute yourself? Don't be shy, this is your chance, amongst many others.
And don't think I'm forgetting about the action. I'm going to be checking my Twitter and the results Twitter tomorrow to see if anybody's posted.
All right, well, you want to take a group photo, Lindsay, so let's do that. And then if people have a question or they're typing away as we do that, please still submit it, and then we'll get to it right after. So if you would like to be in the photo, please turn on your webcam. If you do not want to be in the photo, you can simply turn off your webcam. There's no problem there. I will do 2 countdowns because there's a lot of people on both screens. So I'll just ask you to hold, and then I'll tell you when you can stop smiling. So get ready in 3, 2, 1, smile. You can stop smiling. I'm now just saving the photo. And as some of you are starting to get to know me, I have to say exactly what I'm doing as I'm doing it to make sure that I actually do it. Otherwise, I lose the photos. All right, so there's one, and then we're gonna take a second one. So 1, let me do that backwards. 3, 2, 1, smile. Excellent. Now you can stop smiling, and if you have a question, you certainly can ask the question. Oh, I see one in the chat box, actually. It's okay, Sherry, bad hair day, red nose. I'm also having a red face, no problem. So the question is, when we engage or raise issues, can we focus on issues concerning a specific country or region, or does it have to be a global issue?
Yeah, so I can jump in. So Results Canada, we just try to offer strategic actions that we think will have the highest impact. But that doesn't mean that you can't advocate for what you care about the most, or if you're interested in a specific region as well. Oftentimes, a lot of the issues come together in really interesting ways. So I would definitely say, bring up whatever you care about. Not only is it an opportunity to explain about global issues that Results cares about, but it's an opportunity to explain what you care about, even in your community, in a different country, in somewhere your grandparents live, or where you have family. It's an opportunity to share what you really care about and are passionate for. So don't feel constricted in any way. You can basically plan around whatever you want to advocate and make change for or bring up.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't, when we talked about communicating powerfully, Laura presented about the epic, but we didn't talk about storytelling. And that's a huge, huge component as well of communication that people will often very much so react to. So if you have a story, of course, granted that you have permission to share that story, definitely use that. You can use that personal connection as well to get the attention and really drive your point across when it comes to getting your member of parliament to take action. We are at time, so I really want to thank you all for being here, for your questions, for the discussion. Really looking forward to see you all in action. As we promised, stay tuned. You will receive in the next few days a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as a quick survey. So if you have any feedback on how we can improve, or you're interested in another topic for a future webinar, please give us that feedback, and we'll be more than happy to see what we can do. So really looking forward to see all of your actions on social media for the purpose of this webinar, and any other actions that you will do in the upcoming days and weeks. Thank you all very much. Take care.